from looking at a monk who really ended up not being very monk-like to someone who worked very close with Jefferson and ended up being a quote-unquote traitor, we are now finally back to unique history this week, and we're looking at an article titled Man in the Iron Mask. But before we go into this chapter here, I have to issue a quick apology. I didn't mean to have a large gap in the unique history episodes, but I've had to do some searching and researching and looking things up, and that took a little longer than expected for this article. So I found it finally, and this actually is a better source than the couple of different ones I looked at. So we're going to stick with the historyextra.com article instead of some of the other ones that are a little more, there's a lot more bias to it that isn't very friendly for an episode. So we're going to stick with the History Extra episode here, and there's apparently this photo of this prisoner who wore an iron mask, and the article is going to reveal a little bit more about who that is and why it's so important and why it's captured interest many, many, many years later. So I'm very curious about this Iron Man. Haha, jokes. And I hope you will be too. I've taken a peek down at some of the subtitles, and I think we're in for quite a ride with this. So as always, I'll read through this little chapter here, the article, and react to it in however I want to react to it, because I've done some research on it. I know a bit more of the story, but I haven't looked at it so pieced together in a chronological way as they've done on this article here. So let us begin here. The article is actually titled Unmasking the Man in the Iron Mask. Do we know the identity of the famous prisoner? Dun dun dun! Let us begin. A mysterious figure who languished in French prisons and was forbidden from divulging his crime, the Man in the Iron Mask is one of history's greatest legends. But who was he? Josephine Wilkinson believes that she has uncovered his identity through her research and in the article below. Here we go. And I'll put a little photo up in the edit here so you can see what they mean by iron mask, what it looks like. It looks like a hockey mask, like a goalie's hockey mask. So it's kind of interesting to look at. Well, let's go in here. Call me accursed! The man whose voice was almost drowned out by the storm was dressed entirely in black, a sort of phantom, his head covered with a black helmet and a black mask, something terrible to behold. In its 1850 epic book, Les Victimes de Ballon, Alexandre Dumas created a captivating image of the Man in the Iron Mask that would go on to inspire countless films and cement the mysterious figure's place in popular culture. Dumas was inspired by a legend that had emerged almost 2 centuries earlier. So this is a book written 2 centuries before our time period in 1850, and now this person discovered this legend that was 200 years before his time as well. I love history. It's so wild how we can trace things back over and over again, centuries and centuries and centuries ago. It's just, I love history. It told the story of a mystery prisoner who had been arrested and secretly imprisoned in France. He had spent decades in various dark and damp dungeons, ending up in the Bastille. Closely guarded, he was kept in solitude, where no one could overhear what he might have to say, and he was not allowed even to speak his name. Makes you wonder what he did to deserve that kind of punishment and that silent treatment, and even his own version of the silent treatment, like silent treatment both ways. No one could speak to him, and he wasn't allowed to speak his name or say anything really, and no one would be there to hear him. He was guarded by a jailer. Jailer. Anyway, I'm laughing at myself because of Irish history, but Anyway, he was guarded by a gaoler who was ordered to kill him if he spoke of anything other than his needs. The gaoler, nevertheless, showed great respect to this prisoner, even standing hat in hand in his presence. Oh, well, so yeah, that idea of like tipping your hat in front of a gentleman, that sign of respect. The guard actually did this to this guy. Again, what did he do to deserve that respect? And punishment at the same time. There's two sides of the coin there that he's receiving. Very strange, hey? Alright, yeah, let's keep going. For in Dumas' story, this was not just any prisoner. He was one of the highest born men in the land. According to the legend and Dumas' tale a couple hundred years later, the prisoner was forced to wear an iron mask over his face to hide his identity, and 2 musketeers stood ready to kill him if he ever took it off. Why he had been imprisoned was a state secret, and after his death, his cell was scrubbed and scraped, its miserable furnishings destroyed in case he had written his name in any hidden place. That is a lot of work to hide an identity of a prisoner, nevertheless, too. But apparently he was born of high ranking, so like a high noble, or even maybe a religious priest, or someone in the highest order of command, the highest form of hierarchy in society at the time was this prisoner potentially, and they did a lot to hide his identity. That's crazy. I hope that this author, the Lady Wilkinson here, can tell us more. I very much want to know. Twisted family secret is the next section. Another man who was intrigued by this legend was the French writer Voltaire. What? Voltaire. Sorry, if you don't know anything about French Revolution history, you know who Voltaire is. And his writings and some of his propaganda and sparks of revolution in France. Anyway, so Voltaire looked into him, and he looked into the tales of the prisoner and the horrific mask he had apparently been made to wear. He found out that far from being a story, the man in the iron mask had really existed. He was a prisoner who lived at the time of Louis the 16th. No, Louis the 14th. Got my Roman numerals wrong there. Louis the 14th reigned 1643 to 1715, who was also known as the Sun King. So this prisoner was captured in the Bastille in France under the reign of King Louis the 14th. Interesting. Voltaire speculated there was only one reason why an unknown prisoner would have to hide his face. He resembled the only man who would be instantly recognizable to all Frenchmen, the Sun King himself. Voltaire concluded the prisoner must have been King Louis's secret twin, who had been imprisoned to preserve the security of the kingdom. Oh, what a conspiracy theory. Or maybe it's true. We'll find out more, I think, throughout this article. But wow, a secret twin. And they had to imprison him in the cell because he could... What? Thinking of like the way royal families work, if anything were to happen to Louis the 14th, he would then be king, or maybe they'd be joint kings, and they couldn't have that because society didn't believe in having joint kings or 2 kings ruling at once. And so this was the only option they had, was to hide him and to preserve the security of the kingdom and the status of the king, to imprison him. Interesting. That would also make sense for why the guard would bow to him, because if he looked like King Louis the 14th and was his twin brother, yeah, you would want to show a little ounce of respect, even if he was a prisoner. But I guess he wasn't a prisoner for a crime. He was just a prisoner for security, for safety. It's kind of strange. I don't know if I could ever do that to a twin. If I had a twin sister, or if I knew of twins, and I don't know if they would do that. It's an interesting thought. But let's see here. This twin theory inspired Alexandre Dumas, who incorporated it into the elaborate plot of Le Vicomte. Oh, my French is rusty today. Le Vicomte de Bragelonne. Largely as a result of Dumas's late tale and the films it later spawned, the legend of the Man in the Iron Mask has intrigued people for many years. However, the true story, there we go, we have a true story. The true story is starkly different from the tale that Dumas penned. After poring through letters sent between Louis XIV, the French Minister of War, Louvois, and a gaoler named Saint Mars, I have come to the conclusion that the Man in the Iron Mask was most likely a lowly prisoner named Eustach. Like mustache, but it's with an E instead of a M. Eustach. Okay, so just a lowly prisoner. Okay, well, why would he be under this much protection, and why hide his name? While there is no smoking gun, the accumulation of evidence in this cache of letters points strongly to him. What's more, he didn't permanently wear an iron mask. This was an invention of Voltaire, who wrote that the prisoner wore a mask, the chinpiece of which had steel springs to enable him to eat while wearing it. There is no historic basis for this, however. In reality, Eustach was only made to wear a mask made of black velvet, not iron, in the later years of his life, and only when he might have been seen by onlookers. Oh, that is quite different. The theory that the Man in the Iron Mask was Eustach was first put forward by Jules Lair, a French lawyer turned historian, in 1890. So he decided to look into this story 40 years after Dumas's book. Interesting. His theory was rejected by many historians because Eustach was deemed not interesting or important enough. They thought, as Voltaire and Dumas did, that the Man in the Iron Mask had to be someone of significance, so the search continued. But there is no real reason why a lowly prisoner couldn't have been the Man in the Iron Mask. Before discovering or discussing the reason for Eustach's imprisonment, we need to know his story. It begins in late July 1669, when Louis XIV issued a lettre de cachet, an order for the arrest of a man named Eustach, who was to be captured on sight and taken to the fortress of Pignerol in the Italian Alps. It's kind of a long ways to go from France, take them to the Alps. I guess exile is a popular form of punishment back in that day. So I guess it makes sense, but damn, all the way in the Italian Alps. The terrible and often bizarre treatment he endured while imprisoned was remarkably similar to that in Dumas's fictional retelling of the story. He was held under conditions of utmost secrecy, and his gaoler, a former sergeant in the Musketeers called Saint Mars, ensured that he could not be seen nor heard by anyone. Once a day, Saint Mars dropped a meager package of food onto the floor of his cell, and if Eustach attempted to speak of anything but his most basic needs, Saint Mars was to kill him, an order he declared he was ready to carry out. If he spoke to me or anyone else of anything other than of his needs, I would run him through with my sword. Apparently a direct quote from this Saint Mars, but you can't really take a direct quote from anyone from that many years ago unless it was written down. Anyway, so now we get to hear about Eustach's little story here, and I think he was known as a lowly valet because that's the next section here of the article, a lowly valet. Here, Dumas's version of events in Le Vicomte de Bragelonne veers away from the truth. Far from being the king's secret twin, or even a prisoner of high rank, Eustach was instead described by Louvois as only a valet. Or a valet. I guess I should use the French pronunciation, not the British one for it. Valet. In 17th century France, a person's rank was preserved even in prison. As a valet, Eustach was of lowly status, and this was reflected in the paltry items provided for his use. He was given cheap clothes, as Louvois stated, garments for these sorts of people should last 3 or 4 years. By contrast, St. Mars's other state prisoner, the aristocratic Nicolas Fouquet, I don't know, the fallen superintendent of finance, was given new suits each season. Okay, so he was a fallen superintendent, so someone of high rank basically in finance, and probably the finance ministry was given new clothes every season for every spring, summer, winter, fall. Whereas Eustach was like, nah, you can make these work and make sure you don't ruin them too much in 3 to 4 years. Wiles. While Eustach had no one to take care of him or keep him company, Fouquet enjoyed the services of valets. Eustach's food was barely sufficient to keep him alive, yet Fouquet ate the finest meals such as would have been available to him had he been free. So really, no kind of punishment for him besides not being with his family and his friends, I guess. Crazy. Yet, there was one respect in which the two men were the same. Fouquet was also guarded securely and was forbidden from communicating with the outside world, at least for the first few years of imprisonment. The two men were thrown together while in prison, with Eustach being forced to serve as the disgraced superintendent's valet. Being a prisoner's valet was a decidedly undesirable job. Valets were required to lodge with their masters, remaining in prison, and forbidden even to visit their families for as long as they were in service. Okay. So was he just hired to be this prisoner's valet, and that was why he was there, or did he do something that put him there and they decided to make him work because he's just a lowly person? That's the question I have. So let's see here. Fouquet was meant to have 2 valets while in prison. However, one had died, so only one valet, named La Riviere, was at his master's service. After failing to find a replacement, St. Mars remembered that Eustach had been described to him as a valet, and, with Louis XIV and Louvois' permission, successfully placed him as Fouquet's second valet. He was initially expected to work for him only when French words, my bad. He was initially expected to work for him only when La Riviere was unable to carry out his duties. Eventually, he became a permanent fixture, even being allowed to accompany Fouquet when the latter received permission to walk on the walls of the citadel. In time, Fouquet was permitted to entertain visitors in prison, and Eustach looked after their needs as he did his master's. Weird. It's so weird to give a prisoner a servant or someone to work for him while also being punished for something he did. I just find that crazy. And so different from today's society. It's quite crazy and quite different. Alright, so now we're at this point where this prisoner Fouquet, this failed finance minister basically in France, is now receiving a lot of people. He can now visit and have people come visit him, and Eustach basically ended up working for him. No one blinked an eye while he was being imprisoned, I guess, at this point. Alright, good for him, working his way out of imprisonment, maybe. Well, I guess we'll find out. With so many people coming and going, security became a concern, but Louis XIV and Louvois were not unduly worried. St. Mars was simply ordered to arrange with Fouquet as you judge appropriate regarding the security of the person named Eustach, recommending you, above all, to see to it that he speaks to no one in private. Fouquet himself, a state prisoner, now had the responsibility of guarding Eustach and making sure that the reason for his imprisonment remained unknown. Crazy. So even the prisoner who had this person working for him, he had to make sure that the reason why he was imprisoned, why his servants was imprisoned, remained a secret. Him being in jail, who cares about Fouquet? Everyone knows why he's in jail. But Eustach has to be of utmost secret. He cannot reveal why he was in jail. What? Oh, good. This article actually asked the question I'm about to ask. What then was Eustach's secret? What was he imprisoned for? Clearly, it had to do with his activities prior to his arrest. Great. What the heck were they? Please tell us more. I'm getting impatient. I want to know. Evidence for this is found in a letter written by Louvois to Fouquet on the king's orders. Louvois asked the former superintendent if Eustach had spoken in front of his other valet about what he had seen prior to his arrest. He then crossed out this line and replaced it with one which spoke about how Eustach had been employed before his arrest. Ah. So originally he just asked the question, like, has your valet, Eustach, spoken about why he's been arrested to your other valet or to yourself? And then crossed that out and just decided to tell him why he was arrested. Interesting. I wonder why you would change your thought on that. Like, what's the thinking behind it? Asking about it, that would lead to curiosities and Fouquet asking more questions, so he just gave him the answer ahead of time instead of to prevent further questioning from Fouquet? Or was it just because, I give up, I don't want to keep this a secret anymore? Who knows, really? But it's interesting he changed his mind there. In the original Lettre de Cachet, I'm really saying the French wrong here, I apologize. In the original Lettre de Cachet, Louis had merely stated that he was dissatisfied with this man's behavior. He made no further elaboration. Louis, therefore, offers no hint of why Eustach had so displeased him. However, the context in which Eustach was arrested could provide the answer. Oh gosh. They really do a good job on HistoryExtra.com to just leave you hanging on cliffhangers after every section. You're like, what now? Tell me more. Please. I need to know more. Deep breath, everyone. We're on to the next section here called Servants and Spies. Now that's getting juicy. We have a spy element here. In the summer of 1669, I was about to say, in the summer of 69, anyway, in the summer of 1669, important and secret negotiations were going on between King Charles II of England and Louis XIV. These were being conducted through Charles' sister Henrietta, Duchesse d'Orléans, who was married to Louis's brother, Philippe. Charles and Henrietta used valets to carry messages back and forth across the English Channel, but these valets frequently engaged other servants to carry messages on their behalf. So, messengers passing their messages to other messengers. A little bit of that telephone game, where you say one phrase and you hope that that message carries all the way through, but maybe there's some misconstrued meaning, depending on how many ears hears it. Probably. Often, Charles and Henrietta did not know who these people were. Indeed, in a letter to his sister, Charles noted that he had received a letter from her through the Italian whose name and capacity you do not know, and he delivered your letter to me in a passage where it was so dark as I do not know his face again if I would see him. Eustach, of course, was not this man, since he was not Italian, but French. However, this comment illustrates the atmosphere of secrecy that surrounded communication during this sensitive period. Shortly before Eustache's arrest, Louvois and Letellier, his father and predecessor at the Ministry for War, were included in these negotiations. So they brought in more people to this mess and more people to the secrecy. The more people you add to a problem, or more people you add to try to find a solution, the more messier it gets. And I'm starting to see where this story is going. Oh boy. It is possible that Eustache had been employed by one or both of these men, or perhaps even by Henrietta herself, and that he had become privy to secret and sensitive information. This would account for Louvois' anger towards Eustache, with the minister referring to him as a wretch. And the fact that Eustache was arrested near Dunkirk, one of the principal ports of England, adds a little bit more weight to the theory. Interesting. Whatever Eustache had heard, it was certainly deemed serious enough at the time to warrant a lifetime in prison. Upon the death of his fellow prisoner Fouquet, he was returned to his former cell in isolation. Crazy. So, the theory is that this man, the valet Eustach, probably ended up somehow working for all the key players in the negotiation. And because he had worked for all sides and was accused of working for all sides and having all of the important information from all sides, there's some sort of anger. They did not like it. They did not trust him and sentenced him to life in prison for knowing too much of their plan and of their secrets. Crazy. Wow. What a messy situation. Gosh, okay, let's keep going. Because it was believed that Fouquet's other valets, I'm going to go back and forth between the English and French pronunciation of valet here a little bit. But anyway, because it was believed that Fouquet's other valet, La Riviere, had learned Eustache's secret, and because he had failed to report a security breach that had been discovered shortly before Fouquet died, he was not dismissed from his post and sent away as he should have been, but was instead imprisoned with Eustache. They were held together in Eustache's old cell until they could be transferred to another fortress, Exil. La Riviere died there 7 years later, leaving Eustache alone. Wait a minute, so La Riviere, the other valet to Fouquet, that's minister there, the minister of finance basically, learned of the secrets, and instead of disposing him or transferring him or getting rid of him in whatever way possible, they just partnered him together. Because that's the best way to kind of contain a secret, is by putting who knows about the secret with the secret. Makes sense, and at least Eustache wasn't forever alone, I suppose, to use that phrase, while he was imprisoned, but he ended up becoming alone again here, looks like, after La Riviere had passed. When they were imprisoned together, Eustache and La Riviere lost their names and their identities. St. Mars called them the Gentlemen of the Lower Tower, or his two merles or blackbirds. Later, Eustache would be referred to in official correspondence simply as St. Mars's old prisoner, or, as St. Mars himself likely liked to call him, my prisoner. When Louvois died in 1691 and was replaced in the war ministry by his son, Barbezieux, I have to pretend that's how you say it, Barbezieux, the new secretary did not know who Eustache was or why he had been imprisoned. Eustache had been forgotten, and his secret had lost its importance. Wow. So they just kept him there, no matter what, basically. They kept Eustache imprisoned, not knowing why he was there, but assumed it was important because he had been there for many years already. And no one thought to go check on him. No one thought to double check why he was arrested, confirm the sources. None of that. They're just like, oh, he can stay there, I guess, if he's not causing trouble. And then, yeah, that loss of identity and personhood and citizenship and everything would be really hard to deal with if you think about it. All because you were hired by people to send secrets to each other. Wild. That's wild. But here we go. The Man in the Velvet Mask, the last section here of this article. Nevertheless, Eustach still had his uses. Saint Mars, I guess it should be Saint, like Saint Mars in the more French pronunciation. Whatever, I said Saint already at this point. Saint Mars, who had enjoyed the prestige of being the keeper of illustrious prisoners such as Fouquet, now had no one in his care except Eustach, a man of low social status. In an attempt to preserve his own status as a gaoler, Saint Mars exaggerated Eustach's importance by letting people believe that he was guarding a secret prisoner. Here we go. Here comes the mask, the idea that you have to be quiet, and we need to destroy everything in your room so no one knows who you are, because we're going to pretend that you're of high rank. So that my status as a jailer and as your warden would not go down the drain. There's so much falsehood to this imprisonment that's just crazy to me. Whispers abounded that he might have been Henry Cromwell, the son of Oliver Cromwell, or else the popular Duc de Beaufort, who had disappeared at the siege of Candia. So those were the rumors that started to spread based on who this mystery prisoner was that was kept so secret and private in this tower. This basically the jail at Exile. So it could have been Henry Cromwell or the Duc de Beaufort. Beaufort. I don't know. Anyway. Upon his transfer to the island of Saint Marguerite near Cannes, Saint Marguerite near Cannes, Saint Mars took Eustach with him, providing him with an elaborate mode of transport, a chair tightly wrapped around with a cloth. This was supposed to hide Eustach from onlookers, but instead merely attracted the attention of the curious. Okay, so they wrapped this huge blanket around him to hide his identity and to hide who he was, so that no one would guess. But then instead of it kind of being like, oh look, it's just some prisoner, people are like, oh, who's that? Who's under the mask? Who's under the blanket? Can anyone get a glimpse? And it became an object of awe, an object of fascination instead. Whoops. I guess that's what happens when curiosity is a part of human nature. According to one source, Saint Mars also made Eustach wear a mask for the journey. Here we go. However, he had not been made to hide his face when he traveled to Pignerol, nor when he was in his cell or serving Fouquet. Saint Mars had not received any orders to hide Eustach's face. It was merely another means for the gaoler to fuel the mystery surrounding Eustach, and thereby enhance his own prestige as a warden. Finally, Saint Mars became the governor of the Bastille. Ooh, that's a very high honor there. While Eustach was initially to be left behind on the island, Saint Mars insisted on bringing him to Paris. At this point, official communication about Eustach ends, although he is mentioned in the registers of a Bastille administrator, who noted that the prisoner arrived masked. So that's where the rumor came in about the man in the mask, the prisoner in the mask came from. It's from these administration records when he arrived to the Bastille under Saint Mars. Ah, I see. One little tiny document and it blew up in pop culture. I love it. I love history. It's so fun that way. So at the prison, he wore a black velvet mask which covered the upper portion of his face whenever he might expect to be seen, such as when he went to Mass. 5 years after arriving at the Bastille in 1703, Eustache Eustache died while still a prisoner there and was buried in the prison's parish churchyard of St. Paul's. In many ways, the man in the iron mask was the invention of St. Mars, an ambitious jailer unable to let go of the celebrity status that guarding illustrious prisoners had bestowed upon him. However, in reality, Eustach was not the royal prisoner of legend. St. Mars had needed to cover his prisoner's face, not to hide who he was or the amazing crime he committed, but to hide who he was not. Voltaire was more right than he realized when, referring to Eustache's imprisonment, he said, "No man of any consequence in Europe disappeared." Crazy. And that's where the article ends. So, this is a pretty unique story, isn't it? Where all these people dove into the legend, thought they figured out who it was. There are so many options of who this man was. Louis XIV's secret twin brother, the son of Oliver Cromwell, the famous Duke that they mentioned before, and so many other people that they were thinking about. But really, it's just potentially this valet who was hired to deliver secrets between King Charles, King Louis XIV, Henrietta, the Louvois, and his son. And he got caught between having too much information between the 5 people. And that's what sent him to jail. He did something to piss off Louvois. Louvois reported it to Louis XIV, and then he was imprisoned under the St. Mars. And when Fouquet died, that very high status prisoner died, St. Mars really was greedy and wanted to keep the celebrity status he had. And so he did all these little tricks to make it look like he had a very high-ranking prisoner on his hands so that he could keep the status. But in reality, it was just the guy who served the king, his sister, another country, and a prisoner all along. My goodness, guys, when I find some unique stuff, I really do, don't I? But there you have it, that tale full of twists and tricks and guesses. This is really a big game of Guess Who, if we really think about it. But very interesting, a lot of secrets and falsehoods and lies, and all that happened from this is this poor man lost his whole identity through all of this. And maybe poor man, maybe not, depending on what he actually did, which no one knows. But, I mean, I'm blown away. I love this. A little too much. But there you have it, the Return to Unique History. This chapter is now officially closed. We now know, potentially, who the man in the Iron Mask was in the 1600s in France. Thank you everyone so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the journey we just went through. I know I did. And I will be back with more unique history next week, as I have a few more articles that I think will pique your interest. Take care everyone, and we'll see you next week.